Match week 23 was a strange one, an interesting one. I think there were a few surprises in store. There was some late drama. There was a lot of goals. And we're going to break it all down because we've only got 5 weeks left in the CPL regular season, as these 8 teams all have something to prove or to play for. Let's just bring up the scores from the last week. We had some absolutely fascinating ones. Valor FC 2, Forge 1, Cavalry 3, Halifax 1, Pacific 1, Vancouver 1. That one played at the Royal Athletic Park in Victoria. That one was a great showcase for the local community in downtown Victoria. And then Sunday afternoon, it has occasionally been, but it's rarely dull between York United and Atletico Ottawa. 2-2, where Sam Salter scored twice, and both times York answered within a couple of minutes. And we're going to kind of just break it all down here at the start of our show here. Why don't we start with the standings so we have a good idea of where we are as we head into the last 5 weeks, into the chase towards the CPL Shield and all sorts of other things before the playoffs. Forge and Atletico Ottawa, the only 2 teams who have clinched a playoff spot. Forge's gap at the top of the table now, though, only 2 points after their loss and Ottawa's draw. Cavalry, some space in third place. They have 36 points, followed by York on 33, Halifax on 32. And then outside of the playoff picture, it's Valor on 22, Pacific on 21. And the only currently eliminated team, Vancouver FC, with 12 points. Maybe we'll start with this, guys. And Mitch, we'll come to you first. Just broadly, you could take this any way you want. What are you most excited for and most interested by in these last 5 weeks of the season and this chase for all sorts of records and accolades and trophies?
I mean, I'll start at the top. The big story, the silverware that's on the line with the CPL Shield, and that's a race that looks like it's going to come down to the wire for the first time in a while in the Canadian Premier League between Forge and Atletico Ottawa. There's been different stages of the season where we've given the heavy advantage to Atletico Ottawa with the way they started and all the goals they were scoring and results they were putting together. And then you look at Forge, all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute, they just haven't lost yet. And they go, that long unbeaten stretch. And then, they have stumbled a little bit in the past few weeks, and now it's just a 2-point gap with those 5 games remaining. And obviously, all eyes now on the big meeting, the Shield Showdown this Sunday in the nation's capital, and what a match that's going to be. But again, down to 2 points. I think Atletico Ottawa will be bitterly disappointed they're not tied on points going into this game, having drawn with York United this weekend. But at least they get that 1 point where, if they do win this weekend, they will go first place. There's no asterisks. There's no buts. If a team wins this weekend, they'll be 5th place. It could be Forge pulling away. It could be Atletico Ottawa taking over that top spot again. Either way, that race is going to be so fascinating down the stretch. Obviously, Forge have done it before. Ottawa have done it before. That's really going to be an incredible race, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a lot of fun. I believe that in the 3 years that we at the CPL have recognized a regular season winner, only once has that title been decided on the final day. I believe Atletico Ottawa officially clinched their 2022 title on that last day of the season. Or actually, I think it was the night before, actually, because we didn't have the outcome yet. But they did need to wait for the final weekend. However, the last 2 years, it's been settled a little earlier than that. And as you mentioned, though, Mitch, this Ottawa Forge game, because it's in Ottawa this time, coming up on Sunday, is pretty much everything. If either team wins it, they are in first place. If Forge win, it's a bit of a significant gap, a 5-point gap, which I believe would be the widest they've had yet this year. And Ottawa, meanwhile, could jump back into first after having it for the first half of the season and then falling behind recently. I guess AGR will bring you in on this before we get to what you're interested in for the rest of the season. How exciting is this Ottawa Forge clash, and what are you looking for specifically in that game? Because Forge, let's be honest, played Atletico Ottawa off the park last time they met. Do you anticipate different?
Yeah, I think it's just, it's going to be super exciting just because of what's at stake. I think, though, like you mentioned, definitely the pressure's on Ottawa, so to speak. Even just this weekend, the fact that they had 2 leads and they could have come into this game tied, which would have been, bonkers, because when Forge dismantled Ottawa, it kind of felt like they were pulling away. The fact that Ottawa pulled it back to where they did, and they could have pulled it even further this weekend, already stings. You're at home where you have an excellent record. Ottawa kind of has to set a message here, and the reality is, like, they've kind of ran over the rest of the league. Forge is the one team where, of course, Forge beat them, and then there were 2 draws. Can you even out the season series? The reality is these two are on a crash course for that 1v2 match in the playoffs regardless, which is also going to be massive, because while they're silverware, whoever can win that game and host the final is going to have a huge edge. I think going into that game with a 1-2-1 record versus an 0-2-2 record, for example, is a big game changer. So I definitely am looking for a response from Ottawa. It's a huge week for them. 2 home games. Like, Ottawa has been at their best this year. I want to see them return to and stay at that level across, I guess, both of these games in turn, because I think this will really tell you what they're capable of in the playoffs.
Yeah, absolutely. And, by the way, we will be talking a lot more about both these 2 specific clubs later in the show. But for me, the circumstances or the context is a little bit different than the last time Forge played Ottawa. Not only is this one in Ottawa, which I think does make a big difference. They've been very good at home this year, but Forge have looked much more vulnerable than ever in the last couple of weeks, right? They were finally solved by Cavalry a couple of weeks ago. Valor 2-1. Beat them on Thursday night. And maybe it's a rotated Forge team. They're not quite, they're at their strongest with a couple of suspensions, a couple of players held out of the lineup for rotation, but they're not necessarily quite the juggernaut that they were, last time these two teams, locked horns in August. So really, it could be, the defining moment for Atletico Ottawa. This is maybe where their season, or their regular season at least, is kind of made or broken. But we have gone long enough about these 2 sides, and we will be getting back to them later. So let's move on quickly. There's a lot more to watch this season. There's awards chases on, very much so. We think Sam Salter is probably safe with the Golden Boot now at 17, and Thiago Coimbra second and 11. But there is a lot to look out for in these last 5 weeks. So AGR, what else is interesting you at the moment?
Yeah, I think we have to keep an eye on the 3-4-5 battle. I think, like we mentioned, 1v2 is pretty settled as a crash course. At the same time, in the first 2 years of this new playoff format, 1v2 have gotten the job done in the playoffs. They've met in the final. So it would be interesting to see if any of these 3-4-5 teams, which right now are Cavalry, York, Halifax. I guess as a side note, can Valor make a late push? They've narrowed the gap to 10. They've won 2 in a row. The Canadian Premier League can be a funny place sometimes, so who never know. But what's really fascinating about Cavalry, York, and Halifax is you look at the teams, we've talked about them for weeks. It's hard to split them. Yeah. But there's an interesting split, and all 3 of them are quite good at home, and all 3 of them are middling to poor on the road. So the 3-4-5 could actually make a huge difference, because whoever finishes 3rd gets a huge advantage over who finishes 4th and who finishes 5th. And it's not like there's one who's like, oh, this team's better on the road. They'll be fine with the 4th place or something like that. I think it's pretty clear that all of them would benefit massively from finishing 3rd, getting that little extra rest, and potentially that could be the difference, because with Ottawa and Forge, how it is, whoever loses that 1v2 game, it's going to be tough to respond the week later. Really? And maybe if that 3rd place team can come off a bit of a big victory at home, they'll feel a bit better equipped to what would be a tough trip either way to Ottawa or Forge. So I think there's a lot at stake for that number 3 spot, even if it's not the same sexy race with a trophy on the line like the 1v2.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I think Cavalry needed that big win against Halifax on the weekend. They've got a little bit of space now, and they don't play either of those teams again this year. There is one more York-Halifax game on the schedule. I believe that one's in Halifax in a few weeks. That one is going to be pretty big for those 2 teams, and we don't know whether Cavalry will have separated by then, but it's difficult for Cavalry to do so without a game against either of them. That's a lot to keep track of. Very quickly, just to turn our attention slightly further down the table for a minute or 2 here. Mitch, Valor have won 2 games in a row. They're 10 points back. Keon Strohs has 3 assists and 2 goals in his last 2 games. Is there any chance of a sneaky Valor playoff push here?
I mean, enough of a chance that it's worth mentioning because it is still statistically alive, and they just
That's
do
why we
feel
did
like
it.
exactly. They just do feel like they're playing a little bit more freely and without pressure. Like there's nothing to lose for this Valor team now. They can go into play against teams that, where we mentioned it, all those top 5 teams are, incredibly tight and playing for something big here and know they need wins. And, in some cases, in the case of Forge this past week, are, looking at other games that they need to focus on a little bit more than a game against Valor. So I think if Valor can keep taking advantage of that, obviously they've got Calvary next. Like they're playing all of their direct rivals in terms of trying to move up those standings, which is helpful. Obviously it's an incredibly small chance, but you do like what you've seen from Valor the past couple weeks for sure.
Yeah, I will say tough road ahead for Valor because they go to Calgary, then they go to York, then they have Ottawa at home, Halifax at home, and they finish with Pacific away. So it's not easy. However, they do play the teams directly in front of them. They've got Calgary, they've got York, and they've got Halifax. And who knows? If they won all 3 of those games, then maybe they're right in here with a shout. But it will be very difficult. Anyway, let's before we move on to some other business for this week, let's actually round up the schedule for this weekend right now, just to put a bow on this conversation. It's only a Saturday and Sunday slate this weekend. Halifax Wanderers hosting Pacific FC, followed by Cavalry FC hosting Valor FC. All that on Saturday. Halifax Pacific, by the way, is a TSN game for this week, followed on Sunday by that enormous Atletico Ottawa Forge game at TD Place, and then Vancouver FC against York United wraps up match week 24, and we may know a little bit more about the chase for the CPL Shield and the playoff positioning and individual awards and all that by the end of next week.